if everybody could start making their way towards the seat, we'll go ahead and get started. Did anybody hear that? If you could all start making your way towards the seat, we'll go ahead and get started here in a minute. Okay, I'll just start out. I've got there's always got to be some admin announcements, so I'll make a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll go with the main program. First of all, if you have your phones with you, you might want to think about muting those for a little while. Also, I was asked to make sure you sign the guest book, which I think is in the next room over, before you leave here today, if you, at all possible. For those that don't know me, I'm Kurt Neal. Charles Neal was my dad. He and Bob were first cousins. Our dad passed away a year ago, so within a year, the two of them have both passed now. We have, out of that group of cousins on that side of our side of the family, we still have an aunt that's still living up in Alaska. She's a year or two older than Bob was. Anyway, basically going over, we're going to start out. Pat's going to tell Bob's story, and she'll explain how we came by this, because it comes directly from him. If after that, given whatever time we have left available, those that want to share a memory of Bob from their time with him, at the end of that, we have a video with a song that Pat believed would be a favorite to show or have here. At that point, we'll depart for the cemetery, and I'm sure the funeral director will give us some instructions on how we're going to do that. I'm going to cover the cemetery just in a couple of words so you kind of have an idea. It won't be a long period out there. Let's see. He's being buried where it's a family, kind of a family, Rolfe family plot. So you'll see some other markers and stuff out there for that, which was his wish. I'll go ahead and say a few words out there that I've been asked to do. We'll have a moment of silent reflection, and at that there will be a song that'll start, and at that point they'll lower the urn down in the ground, and as they finish with that, the song ends, people can walk forward. There's going to be a bucket of sand, and there's a shovel there, a small shovel that people can throw that in. At the end of that, when you're ready to leave, we've set up a room over at the Pizza Ranch, and my sister Cindy here has got just a couple words on that.
Okay, hi, I'm Cindy. And I don't want to forget, Dad and Bob do still have one other cousin still alive, and that is Ella. And Randy, her son, Randy and Ella were trying to make it here. Randy texted me numerous times. They're in Indiana, and texted me numerous times, but with Delta's problems last week, they couldn't get their flights ready for it. So otherwise, the other cousin would have been here. Okay, so yes, Pizza Ranch is on Main Street in Wadena. They have a private room we have reserved. When we get there, we can just go directly to the private room. They have cups out already, so everybody can just grab a cup and grab something to drink right away. But we'll find out first, because there's maybe a few requests. Somebody might want gluten-free, somebody might want cheese-free. We'll get those requests to the folks at Pizza Ranch right away so that they can get those special pizzas going. I have told them to probably plan on being ready for us to want to eat maybe about 3 o'clock. So we might be gathered there for 15 minutes or so before we start eating, but that'll give them a chance with the special pizzas.
Thank you.
Wait, this is the person who has everything here. all the pictures, everything that's done, it's because of Cindy.
Okay, with that, I'll turn this over to Pat, and she's going to tell you Bob's story, and we'll go.
That's good. Well, I gotta start here now, don't I? Of course, it gets the wrong, right page helps to start. Bob was born in 1928, and his mother was a very interesting person. She was a county superintendent of schools when she was very young. In fact, she was elected, the first woman elected in this county by a woman. And she was elected the county superintendent of schools. And she has always been incredibly wonderful with children. She always was very concerned with every child. But Bob was born in October 1928, and he was adopted by Gertrude in August of 1929. You can see why Bob got some of his things that he does at an early age. He loved to write, and back there is his last notebook. Take a look at it. There are probably 50, 100 notebooks. He had one for every year, so they've been around a long time. And every day he wrote a little bit of what happened that day. And if he didn't have anything to write on, he'd write on his hand. He was very, very easy to work with. He became a world traveler at the age of 6. His mother took him to Alaska. Alaska wasn't a state. It wasn't much up there at all. It was people who went up there to help get Alaska started. They stopped at Lake Glacier Park on the way out there, and Bob was playing with the chief of the tribe's children, and that night he asked Bob's mother if he could take Bob into the tribe as an honorary member. And of course, Gertrude said yes, but nobody told Bob. But after the powwow was over, someone came out of the powwow and took up Bob's hand and took him up standing in the middle and did a little dance around here. Now, you're a little kid, can you imagine what this was like? But Bob said he wasn't scared, not at all. Anyway, he enjoyed that. And the next day, they did the ceremony, and Bob was adopted into the tribe. The second person, white man in the United States, before him was a very important person, a president, Theodore Roosevelt. First one, and Bob second. I think that's very interesting. And anyway, the next year then, Bob liked to travel, and Gertrude loved to travel. She used to travel by herself all over before she married Bob, before she got married. Anyway, Bob was 14 years old when he wrote an essay on conservation in Minnesota, and it won the state prize. He could go on to a camp. He was supposed to go to a camp, but something else interfered. The University of Chicago was starting a program for whiz kids. That means that 2 kids from every state would be allowed to join this program. They'd be tested, and they went in. Bob was one of the people chosen from Minnesota. So he got down there, and Bob loved it, but he had to take more tests, so he skipped a lot of time. He was put in as a junior. He skipped 3 years. He was put in a second to the end of, see, I can't even talk right now. He was a junior in college. That's what he was started out with. And he did the next 2 years. But he kind of, by then it was 1946. And Bob never told me what the problem was, but he had one course to finish. And he decided he didn't want to do this. often thought that it probably, when you have big people from back in service and you're a little kid, I think I'd be kind of intimidated by it too. But anyway, he said he didn't mind it. He wanted to go home. He wanted to get home, so he went back up and helped with his parents at the cottage cabin. It's a big place now. Anyway, he got a new name down there. Well, he was at the college, Sol Exulp, and it was spelled SOLXOLP. That's how a library book got to him. No, who knows? Anyway, that was his new name, Sol Exulp. But he had very good friends. He made very good friends for 4 years. Most of them, they're all dead now, of course. In 1941, his mother married Alec Rolfe, and he adopted Bob. How many times that me? 1, 2, 3 times he was adopted. Ever heard of anybody being adopted 3 times? Okay, what else? Excuse me. In Bob's words, in the fall I started on a teaching degree at St. Cloud, and I met Pat and we fell in love. I obtained a degree from the college. I didn't like some of the things, but I thought I'd like to teach, so he did. And he got a job at a small town in Minnesota. And as soon as he got out there, the National Guard grabbed hold of that group, and they all went off to serve in the Army in Camp Rucker, Alabama. I should tell you, though, how I met Bob. It's kind of interesting. The school had a snow day, and everybody was out there. I was strapping my skis on, and with one of my friends, and I said, "What's that what's coming down the mountain?" It was something in white, all in white. What would that be? I looked at it and I thought, that's an interesting thing. It's a guy. That's the guy I'm going to marry. I did. But he was so funny looking because he was dressed in white, all white, pure white, Army airplane, extra stuff. And then what uniform he had on was a mechanic's outfit. So he looked all white. But that's how I met him, but I guess I chased him until he caught me. We'll see. Anyway, but we were married in Hudson, Wisconsin, where some of my friends are here, and my relatives. Anyway, they released a lot of people down at Camp Rucker, and he came home to teach. And he taught in Robbinsdale for a year, and then he decided he wanted to go to school, so he started school at the University of Minnesota in nuclear physics, but he didn't like that at all. So he transferred and went on to the University of Wisconsin. Fine. And that was he was very happy with that. But then when he finished, I said, Bob, all this schooling, we really need to get away from here for a while. We're going to be working all the rest of our lives. We should probably go to Europe now. So Bob said, how are we going to afford it? I said, we'll get the money. Don't worry about it. So we did. And he's so funny. Anyway, when we got to Europe, we bought a car. We found you could buy a car. Europeans couldn't buy a car, but we could buy a car. So for $999, we bought a new Renault and headed our way with a big, huge book. They didn't have good things like we have nowadays that you can just look it up, click, 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 click. But it was a wonderful thing, and we really enjoyed that. We went off to Scandinavian countries, and then we came back down, and we had to make a couple of stops for Bob's dad. Bob's father used to be a professor at a small college, not a college, it's a college now, but back then it was a place where kids from the farms could come in and go to their school for 6 months. And Bob's dad taught them. And then the other time, 6 months, they'd stay on the farm. But I don't think they have that anymore. Anybody know? I don't think they would. Anyway, he did that, and we went to another thing. We had to deliver something to one of Alex's pupils, and he said, "Are you going to Berlin?" "Oh no, we're not going to Berlin. We're not going to take a chance on going there. That's behind the Iron Curtain." He said, "What do you mean? You've got to go there. That's the best place in all of Europe, and you've got to go there." And he said, "I'll take you. I'll drive your car, no problem." Well, we ended up going to Berlin. His mother lived there, and she still lived there. And this is 6 years after, 1956. And it was still in very, very bad shape. But it was something that we wanted to do. But that night, he said, let's go into the Russian sector. So through the Brandenburg Gate we went, and we got over there, and we looked around all day. And that was nice. I liked that. Interesting, because that was worse, much worse than regular Berlin. We came back, and he said, "Now, let's go see the Russian monument. It's up these stairs. And dark. This is dark as can be." We went up the stairs and got to the top. 2 bayonets right in our eyes. Let me tell you, that was pretty scary. We went down those steps as fast as we could. I don't know how we got down the steps, in fact. It was very scary, but that's the most terrified I've ever been in my life. But the British people would tear down that ornament, that thing, for if they didn't have any people up there. But we didn't know that.
And she never told her parents.
Anyway, okay. And we really loved traveling in Europe. It was a wonderful experience. We learned a lot of things that we hadn't been any place. Goodness, Bob had, but that was when he was a kid. But the day before we left, we took our things to the little place where you store everything, and Bob took the car back the next morning, and I got there. He said, "You go get the things." I got there. He hadn't given me the information to get the things back. So first chance of Bob, first time Bob does one of these things. Anyway, he didn't come, and he didn't come, and he didn't come. And the boat train was taking us up to the, what was it? I can't remember what boat it was. It was, I'll think about it. What?
Was that the one that was a ferry?
He was saying, no, the ferry, we took the boat, the train to the boat, and the boat was Queen Elizabeth, way back when. I think that's the one that's now probably out in California. Okay. And I'm standing there and thinking, what am I going to do? I can't get on that boat train, and I can't leave him. What am I going to do? And this one lady came up to me. She was with some travel agency, and she said, "Now look, don't worry, don't cry. I'll handle it for you." So I said, "Well, I don't want to get on the train." She said, you must get on that train, and I'll see that your husband gets later on the first class train. I said, "Oh, well, that would be okay." All of a sudden, we see Bob. He couldn't get a porter. He has all this stuff, carrying this stuff. What he had done, he had gone to buy Chanel number 5 for me. Well, what can you say after that? Okay. I'm giving you little things about Bob on the way so you know him a little bit better. When we got back just to Minnesota, Bob got a job in Roseville. We got a, actually no, we got a, that was another, anyway, we moved to Roseville, and Bob got a job with General Mills. And interestingly enough, General Mills and many other companies in the United States had hired German scientists to come to this country because we didn't have people who were advanced in science as much as they were. And I think he said there were about 500 people in the United States were working these things. And they worked on things like fiber optics, high altitude research balloons, deep sea submersibles, and things like that. And it was all based on government contracts. So the government, I'm sure, was taking pretty good care of these people. But I just thought, oh, gee, after what we went through over there, I thought, oh, my golly, I don't know if I'd want to work with the Germans or not. Anyway, but he loved that. And later on, he worked on proposals for foreign Navy systems working in Germany and Rome. The Federal Administration and UNIVAC developed an air traffic control system which would be deployed at 60 airports around the U.S. He was assigned to write the descriptive brochure of the system, which could be provided to other countries of interest. The Japanese representative came to the U.S. and purchased the system for their new Tokyo airport. And he loved doing that, but he said he got kind of bored after a while. And about that time, his brother, Jim, anybody remember Jim? Some of you guys do, yep, okay. Jim had a business that he didn't want to take with him to Arizona. And so he said, Bob, why don't you take it? You can do this. And so Bob said, well, okay, he quit his job. And he did this business, and then it was I can't remember exactly how it was done. Anybody remember a description of that? Clinchon was the name, but if you had this is a.
You mean when we had to come and visit you and then build the tool system? Anytime.
Yes, she means that.
Yes.
Anyway, it clinched things on the corner. But anyway, and there were little kids that helped. Really, there were. They loved having this. Way back when. Okay. Oh, and then we took a trip to Arizona. We did a lot of road scholar things back in those days. And we had a trip on the western part of the state, and then we drove through Sun City West and on the way back to visit a friend. And we thought, wow, this is a great place. We should look into this. And we came down that winter. They had a little program for people that if you came down, they'd give you a week living there in a nice little unit for something simple, maybe $300 a week or something. Well, we just loved it. And so we bought a lot and came down in August and planned the whole thing. And it was built and ready to move into by January. We moved from Minnesota in the icy cold roads, and they couldn't get the big moving truck into our driveway because the road in front of us had ruts in it, just for regular cars. So it was a little problem with that. But they finally made it. Anyway, we moved in there. We loved it. And Bob always said that his words were, we have lived a new life in this incredible area, filled with so many new adventures we couldn't even take advantage in the 27 years we lived here. And as you know, Bob's was a photographer. Everybody knows that. And he just wasn't with a camera at all, without his camera. And Bob even kept writing notes when he was very sick. I'm going to tell you what happened to the whole thing. On June 5th, 2023, I went to the local hospital and got temporary treatment of a 9x9 kidney stone. I couldn't get the help that was needed because the hospital didn't have any anesthetics and any anesthesiologists, people to do it, treat cancer and emergency cases. I was discharged the next day. Then it was a little late in October. Finally, they took it out in a little October. On Saturday, December 16th, I got a metroblasm report from my doctor. For me, he told me, my regular doctor said, you're doing great. You've got another 5 years to live. On December 30th, that was December 16th. December 30th, I went to the same hospital with kidney stone pain, and I was discharged the next morning. I had a temperature of 103 when I was taken out of the hospital. I wasn't told anything about my illness or discharge, but I had no desire for food. In fact, I had a problem getting food down. No desire to get out of bed, no desire to do anything. Nothing. My MD had no comment about this. About 3 weeks later, after the stay in the hospital, Hospice of the West arrived at our apartment, which I thought was kind of strange. They told me I had a life-ending disease. However, the end time depended on how much food and calories I had. I eat the very best I can eat, but it's very difficult. I also sleep a lot, and so this is my life for now. Difficult. Bob passed away on May 16th, 2004, in Sun City West at the age of 95, with his loving wife at his cell.
Okay, keep going, you can do it. You've made it this far.
As Alec and Gertrude, as well as his brothers Jim and John, he's lovingly remembered by his wife, his many cousins, friends, and everybody. Thank you all.
Bob wanted you to know his life story,
And he wanted it the way he wanted it.
and you did it great. You did it great, dear. You did it great.
Well, thank you all for coming here. You're all very precious to me. I can't believe so many of you came here today.
As I said, we have a little bit of time for a little bit of sharing, and so I'll just kind of open it up. I have one very short little story about Bob. I could go through 100, and we all could, for sure. But this one actually was related by my uncle, Paul, who was an auto mechanic, and I'm sorry, let me make sure I do this. Anyway, Paul was an auto mechanic and ran a shop. Well, one time they were visiting down at Bob and Pat's place in the Twin Cities, and after a little while, Bob says, say, Paul, could you come on down to the basement with me? And I think you had a drive-in garage in the basement, okay? Well, down in the drive-in garage, Bob had a small little sports car, and he had covered the entire floor of the basement with paper, and he put the car there, and he had taken the car apart completely, and when he'd take a part off, he would put it somewhere and he'd draw a line to help with the reassembly, I guess it was. Well, anyway, he had gotten it all apart and he'd gotten it all together, but what he needed Paul down there for was over in the one corner was a little pile with a circle goes, unknown. Okay, who else? You're going to have to come up here because I can carry the microphone. Okay.
I'll just do a quick one and then.
Oh, the clip right here. Oh, there we go. That is tight. Okay. There we go. There.
So as we were driving up the other day, and is this working? Pat was complaining about how long it took us. Well, that brought back a childhood memory of Pat and Bob took my sister and I on a 3-week Western U.S. road trip. And we started the trip driving down, I don't know if it was 35 at the time or not, but all of a sudden Bob is going 90. Now, I'm an accountant. I'm a rules-oriented person. I'm 11 years old, and I'm going, oh, we're going to... But she wondered why it took us so long. Well, Bob had a lead foot. We didn't drive 90 on the way up here tonight, this week.
Just hand it to her. Yeah.
Just to note, we are live streaming to our friends and family that can't be here today. That's one of the reasons why we have to use the mic, because they can hear you here, but they can't hear you in Arizona. Okay, so make sure that we have our mic on, okay? No, pass it around. Just raise your hand.
Hi, I'm Kay Rolfe Young, and Uncle Bob would come to town almost every year in July to go to his reunions up in Morris and around town. Well, we'd pick him up at the airport, and he would take my husband's car and go off adventuring all around Minnesota. So a couple of years ago, he went off on his adventure, and then we wouldn't see him for like a week, and all of a sudden at 9 o'clock at night, our doorbell rings. And he couldn't find a motel room anyplace around, so he drove all the way back to Bloomington to spend the night, to come all the way back up here to finish his tour of Minnesota. He was a great guy. We loved sitting around telling family stories.
More of a Pat and Bob story, and in honor of the Minneapolis Aquatennial Week, it's a reflection back when we were kids. Pat and Bob would take us to the, well, I don't know if it was always, but one year we went to the Aquatennial parade, and we had to carry 2 ladders and a big plank, and we complained how heavy it was, and why do we have to carry this stuff if we're going to a parade? And they were like, just wait, you'll see. And lo and behold, we get there, we put the 2 ladders up, the plank across the top, and we had the best seats in the house for the parade. And if I recall, there was a time where we weren't up there, and Pat had some other kids, and she said, you guys get down from there. That's for my nieces and nephews. So, but I think about that often.
So I'm Chris Neal, so second cousin to Bob, and had a lot of really good memories of Bob coming up in the summer and getting a chance to visit. And so 2 years ago, so he'd been 93 years old, my girls were down swimming in the irrigation pond, and he would ride down on the ATV with Dad, and I was not there to see this happen, and it took a little inquiry before I believed it. But they came down to watch him swim, and he went out and swam across the pond and back. And I asked him, what did he have on? He said, well, he had on a t-shirt and a pair of shorts. He apparently was prepared to go on this swim. And you have to kind of understand, there is no approach into this. You go down a bank, and within about 3 to 4 feet, it's over your head. And he just went right out there, swam across, swam out, climbed back up. And yeah, they said his hair was wet. He'd obviously gone for a swim.
Well, my name is Addison. Bob would have been a probably third cousin of mine. When I was about 6 years old, we were out at a cemetery, I believe in Verndale, and me and my middle brother were there, and we were little kids just playing around, and at some point, someone got out some water. And me and my brother and Bob had a water fight in the cemetery after the funeral. And I remember Bob taking pictures of us, of course, and at one point, Bob had said, I've never had this much fun at a cemetery.
Bob doesn't like to give up anything. What I did before I came up here, 2 days before, Bob likes wine. And he had a stack of wine up that high, this wide. I can't believe he had all that wine. And a couple of us tried to get rid of it. Some wasn't very good, and some was okay. But would anybody like to have some free wine racks? He just doesn't like. There's somebody who will tell you about Bob doesn't want to give up anything. They want to buy our house. Bob didn't want to buy it and let go of it for 2 or 3 years. I think it's finally going to happen.
I just thought of a couple things. I wasn't really going to talk, but I was 7 years old when Pat and Bob got married. So, and of course, I was a flower girl in their wedding. Nowadays, I think flower girls are a lot younger. But when Bob first became a part of the family, and in our house, we always got together for Sunday dinner. I mean, I think a lot of families did that. You know, after church, it'd be like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we'd have dinner. And quite a few of my family was married by then, and so they were gone, and they would always come home. Well, for the longest time, I don't know if, I'm sure some of you remember how slow Bob ate. And it was polite to sit at the table until everyone was done eating. And I think it took about 2 years maybe, and finally, that's it. Bob's part of the family. If he wants to continue eating, we're done. We're getting up. Well, then we'd start putting the food, we'd leave it there, and he'd take more, and then we'd finally think he was done, and we'd take the food out into the kitchen to put away. Where's those potatoes? I want some more of those potatoes. Or something. So that's one memory that I do have of him. And, you know, growing... Oh, it was like 20 or 22, something like that? No, they just said Bob chewed every bite for 32 times. Oh. So obviously he had good digestion. Yeah, but anyway, the other thing I think of is that I was the youngest of the 6, and your mom and dad didn't have a lot of money, and this was back in the day and age when you had to take the film in to be processed. And so there are very few pictures of me until I was 7 years old. Very, very few. But then Bob started taking pictures. My dad had a nice little rock garden. He'd take us out there. And so a lot of the pictures we have are because Bob took pictures. So, and the gal from Bloomington, he often stayed at my house also. And I enjoyed that time, but the funny thing is, one more thing about getting together. You'd be with a group of people, and we would all be all visited out, getting ready to go. Then Bob wanted to start to talk. He didn't want people to go. But anyway, he would come back. He'd stop before his trip up north, and then he'd either stay with Sally or with me. And it was really interesting to listen to him talk about his time up north, and the last time he was there alone was when he got all the information on the island cabin, and I think there'd been an article in the paper, and that you told about how he got to meet some of the people that had been in the house since. But I do remember going up there with my brother once. I think I was 10, 12 years old, there for the weekend with my mom and dad. But he'd come home and he'd tell me all about the time. He'd explain the Army reunion. He'd explain the high school reunion. He was the oldest one there of many classes. And he really liked his time visiting on the farm. So I just thought I'd share that with you.
And speaking of his photography, the camera that's back there on the display, that was the last film camera that Bob ever owned. It was Canon AE1. And anyway, and after that he went to digital, and now there was no cost to as many pictures you wanted to snap. So I don't know how many of those ever got printed out off the memory cards, so there's probably a mess of them laying around somewhere.
Yeah, I think everybody, you know, the camera, the pictures are legendary with Bob, but I remember my dad, and the family joke was, nobody will ever see him. You said the same thing, yeah. He took all these pictures, but nobody ever sees them. So 2 years ago, July of 2022, was when Bob came up, and my brother Craig, through the use of his boat, Craig and his wife Stacy and I went with Bob out to the island, and the Lazarettis were there, Mary and her brother Mike, and the whole crew. I mean, there was all the way down the dog, the kids. They treated Bob like he was a celebrity. We pulled up to that dock, and the first person down, I can't remember who it was, as soon as Bob gave his name, it was like word through the rest of the house. It's like, Bob Rolfe is here, Bob Rolfe is here, Bob Rolfe is here. And I mean, they had so many questions for him. They wanted to know so much of the history of that island. They were absolutely wonderful. I would love to get a peek of his diary at the end of that day. He said that had been something he'd been wanting to do for so many years, and that family made it happen. How many of you remember Bob somewhat being forgetful? Did he ever forget things? So the last few years at the house, my mom wasn't in the best health. And actually last year, my mom had already passed away when he came for my dad's funeral. But the last few years, he would stay at the house, and inevitably, Cindy would get a phone call, a message afterwards. Say, Cindy, I think I forgot, you name it. One year it was his suit jacket. He came for Addison's. Did he? Did you have to mail it back? Yep. Yeah. He came for Addison's wedding, and he left his suit jacket at the house, so we had to mail that back. So last August, when he came for my dad's funeral, I went over to the house to strip the bed. Although with Bob, you never had to strip the bed. He always had that done. The bedding was stripped, the comforter was folded on the side, all ready to go. It was absolutely amazing. Anyway, there's an envelope laying on the bed for me. And he says, in his little tiny writing that it took me a little while to figure out, thanks for sending things back to me in the past. I hope I didn't forget anything this time. He says, I look forward to talking with you, and I hope to get back next summer, which is today. And he left an envelope of pictures from the 1980s. First I've seen him.
And finally, Cindy and my sister Gail, I think you two went down to their house one time and went through a bunch of the pictures, right? So you need to contact the two of them if you want to see some of the pictures. But of course, the ones they were bringing back probably were mostly related to our family, I'm guessing. So should we? Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and get ready to go out to the cemetery. And I'm going to pass this to Joe. You want to? Oh, I'm sorry. We have the video. Yes. Sorry about that.
So at this time, this concludes our services and gathering here at the funeral home. If I could ask you please to stand, we'll go to our vehicles, and we'll start the procession to the cemetery shortly. As we cross Highway 29 here, please be careful if a car comes through and doesn't recognize us as a procession. Make sure that we don't get into an accident arguing with them, okay? So let's drive safely as we go to the cemetery.
I think I missed that section of the contact here.